Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the Compassionate, the Merciful. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Amini Swedi, and you're listening to the Murid Talks podcast. Welcome back, everyone, to another solo episode of our podcast. And this will be, inshallah, the second episode within the holy month of Ramadan. May Allah accept our prayers. May He accept our fasts. May He accept our efforts within His divine path. In the last episode, we talked about the life of Jesus and Mary and how they relate to the idea of divine convergence, how the divine and the human become intertwined, how the vertical and the horizontal meet. Today, I'd love to touch upon the prophet Abraham, the father of the three Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Now, even though all the prophets of God, from Adam all the way to our prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, conveyed the Tawheed, the uniqueness and oneness of the divine being, it is commonly accepted that the prophet Abraham is the father of monotheism. Again, all prophets preached monotheism, but the science of Tawheed, the science of the uniqueness and oneness of God, is believed to have been well codified during the prophethood of Abraham. And so today we'll be exploring how divine contemplation is connected to the prophethood of Abraham. What can Abraham teach us about divine contemplation and the stages we go through in the divine path? Before I continue, I'd love to read a couple of verses from the Holy Qur'an, from the 6th chapter, verses 73 to 80. God says, "And it is He who created the heavens and earth in truth. And the day He says, be, and it is. His word is the truth, and His is the dominion on the day the horn is blown. He is the knower of the unseen and the witnessed, and He is the wise, the acquainted." And mention, O Muhammad, when Abraham said to his father Azar, "Do you take idols as deities? Indeed, I see you and your people to be in manifest error. And thus did we show Abraham the realm of the heavens and the earth, that he would be among the certain. So, when the night covered him with darkness, he saw a star. He said, This is my Lord. But when it set, he said, I like not those that disappear. And when he saw the moon rising, he said, This is my Lord. But when it set, he said, Unless my Lord guides me, I will surely be among the people gone astray. And when he saw the sun rising, he said, This is my Lord, this is greater. But when it set, he said, O my people, indeed I am free from what you associate with Allah. Indeed, I have turned my face toward He who created the heavens and the earth, inclining toward truth. And I am not of those who associate others with Allah. And his people argued with him. He said, Do you argue with me concerning Allah while He has guided me? And I fear not what you associate with Him, unless my Lord should will something. My Lord encompasses all things in knowledge. Then will you not remember? Sadaqallahu al-Azim. God has surely uttered the truth. So let us explore these verses and see how the prophethood of Abraham teaches us about divine contemplation. In verse 73, God begins by talking about how He created the heavens and earth in truth. In the previous episodes, we talked about how God manifests through his divine names, and God has a myriad of names. And so God says he created the heavens and earth in truth. We know one of the names of God is the truth, Al-Haq. And so whatever is created or manifested should also be the truth, because it is created in truth. It is created by the name, the truth. And so, in reality, nothing is produced except that it is from God. He continues by saying he only says, be, and it is. And this shouldn't be seen as a successive production, but rather as a simultaneous one. Be and it is, not be and it becomes, be and it is. So it's that instantaneous production. Whenever God wants a thing to be, he just says to it, be and it is. And this symbolizes God's eternal now. God is always in the now. There is no before, there is no after. God is ever present. And so the universal manifestation is also, in a sense, within that eternal nowness, that eternal present. And so we could say that God always speaks, and so his manifestation doesn't cease. After all, another of God's name is the manifest, and so God is always manifest. He continues by saying his word is truth, and so all of manifestation is his word. Again, he created the heavens and earth in truth, and his word is the truth, and so all of manifestation is his word. And they are none other than him, because he is the truth. And so the whole of manifestation, the universal manifestation, is none other than God, because he is the manifest, he is the truth, he is the creator, he is the manifester. But it's important to note that from a relative sense, manifestation is not God. But from an absolute sense, everything is God. And so the Sufis talk about this idea of huwa, la huwa, he and not he. Whenever we speak about anything but God, we have to be careful. From one aspect, it is God, of course, from a holistic sense, from the point of view of the truth. But from our relative sense, it is not God, because God cannot be limited by any particular thing. So we could say that it is being, in as much as it participates in being, and it is not being because it is limited, because it is determined, because it is relative. Being is absolute in itself. But how does this connect to Abraham? So we first read, after the 73rd verse, in the 74th verse, how Abraham rebukes his people for taking idols as God. So Abraham denies all forms of idolatry, including that of anthropomorphism, which is idolizing God in human form. And so this encompasses all forms of idolatry, because most of the times when we read idolatry in the Qur'an, we think of people who create images out of stones or rocks and worship them. That's just one form. But idolatry is any form of worship that is not God in his absoluteness. And so whether we picture a certain form when we worship God, whether we worship money, human power, people in authority, all these are forms of idolatry. And so in a sense, we are all idolaters in that we worship certain idols, even these images we create of God. And so one of the Prophet's companions, Umar, said, whatever you think of God, that isn't God. And so you have to always negate these images, these idols within you, because God cannot be limited in any fashion, right? And so it's this idea of perpetual negation. And this echoes back to the Shahada, La ilaha illallah. There is no God but God. And so first you have to negate. And here we negate all forms of worship. And we talked about this in the previous episodes. So we connect back to the idea of how God manifests the heavens and earth in truth by God saying that he showed Abraham the dominion of the heavens and the earth so that he might be among those who are certain. And this idea of yaqeen is very important within the Sufi tradition. This idea of certainty. It's not just about blind belief, but actual certainty and realization. And so God shows Abraham the dominion of the heavens and the earth. And by this we understand universal manifestation. God allows Abraham to realize universal manifestation and ultimately so that he might be certain about the divine reality. Not just imagine about it, not just believe about it, but to realize it, to be in certainty. We see then how Abraham, by the use of external phenomena and contemplative argument, showcases to the idolaters how what might seem grand and worthy of worship are also nil in relation to the one and ultimate reality. Abraham, by the use of the celestial bodies, star, the moon, and the sun, which play, of course, a very important role in traditional symbolism, but we'll get to that in a little bit, nevertheless highlights how insufficient they are as deities, as lords, because ultimately they are limited and God is unlimited. So what about other forms of worship or other forms of idols? We're talking about celestial bodies here, the sun, the moon, the star. These are grand entities, but nevertheless they're insufficient, they are limited. What about other forms? Right? Rocks and stones and money and power, ourselves. They are all limited as well, and so they cannot be lords, they cannot govern us. So we have to seek that which is beyond limitation. So we see here how Abraham exercises contemplative and reasonable argument as to the being infinite and unbound, principle of all grand and small, determina beyond determination. So Abraham uses contemplation to arrive at the realization of ultimate being. Now, this is one way of viewing the narrative depicted in the Qur'an. So how Abraham goes through these different phases, the star, the moon, sun, in that it's an external point of view as related to Abraham's delivering proofs to his people. So it's not that Abraham is actually believing that the star and the moon and the sun are lords, but rather as a form of argumentation, as a way to prove to the idolaters that they cannot be God because they're always set, they're always limited in their appearance, in their reality, in their being. And so that's one way of seeing it from an exoteric point of view, from a religious standpoint, from a Sharia'ite standpoint. But as we've always discussed, the Murid should examine the holy books and the entirety of reality from an inner dimension. So we shouldn't observe this narrative only as an external discourse, but also as an inner contemplation within Abraham himself. If we observe the verses that hold the contemplative aspect of Abraham's thought, we will realize that they are bracketed by two statements that are external in nature, which act as a shell of the pearls of wisdom contained within Abraham's ascension. And so initially, he tells his father that him and his people are in manifest error, and towards the end, he says, I seek refuge in Allah from what you associate with him. And so these are external statements towards the people. And so they bracket the internal aspect of Abraham's contemplation. They're like a shell. You have to break the shell and get to the wisdom, to the sir, to the secret. So, by God's will, let us open these external shells and explore the symbolism of the heavenly realms. Let us explore with Abraham the dominion of the heavens and the earth, that which God revealed to him, so that we might arrive together with Abraham at divine contemplation. So initially God tells us that Abraham was shown the dominion of the heavens and the earth so that he might be among the certain. Again, we talked about how yaqeen plays a huge role in the Sufi tradition. It is translated as certainty, and it's mostly used when such certainty is achieved through vision, verification, and realization. And so Abraham was granted certainty by the vision of God's dominion, which ultimately leads him to the realization of the divine himself. So that's something we all aspire to achieve. But how is this achieved? That's very important because it just doesn't happen. There is a process one has to undergo in a certain sense. What does the Qur'an teach us about the process? So in the beginning, Abraham is covered by the darkness of night. The symbol is akin to that at the beginning of Genesis, which tells us how the beginning was darkness. We also see a similar trend in the journey of the Prophet's ascension, the Miraj, which begins at night. So God says how he took his servant during the night from the sacred mosque in Mecca to the sacred mosque in Jerusalem. And so again, the symbolism of the night, the symbolism of darkness is very important in the divine path. So this night, this darkness entails the beginning of the spiritual journey, which mirrors that of universal manifestation. Universal manifestation starts in darkness. This beginning in darkness, from a negative aspect, symbolizes ignorance, but from a positive aspect, symbolizes unrealized potential, similar to the hidden treasure that we talked about in the first episode of the podcast. And so Abraham begins in this darkness. What happens? Abraham sees a star. The first level of determination, akin to the fiat lux, let there be light. So this is symbolized by a star. So one, when we think about stars, we think of the dim light, right? So they're very far away, so they're dim, but also of their multitude, of their plurality. They're many, right? And so this level seems to represent that of the least unified, the dimmest of lights, and the furthest from vision. We could see from this a symbol of the corporeal faculty, that of our senses, which is the darkest and furthest from the spirit. So our bodies are the farthest from the spirit. They are the tail end of reality, basically. But once Abraham realizes its transience, the star sets, right, in the transience of the corporeal faculty, the body withers, dies, and so it cannot be the ultimate reality. He realizes that he must go further, for it is itself just a symbol, the body, the corporeal faculty, the star, the dim aspect of reality. It's just a symbol and not the one symbolized, a determination of the determiner. So Abraham goes on. And this time he sees the moon and identifies it as his Lord, as his governor. And so the moon, from our perspective, is brighter than the stars and closer to us. The moon is reflective in nature. It reflects the sun. It's not endowed with its own light, and so represents the reflective mental faculty of man, that which is in between the corporeal and the spiritual, or the intellectual, the spiritual and intellectual being one and the same thing. What can be termed as the psychic domain, where our soul resides. So this is the level of the soul. It is the abode of the in-between, the abode of dreams, the abode of imagination, the seat of reason and analysis. It is, in a sense, the principle of individuality, the ego. Hence, it tends to bind, to delimit, to distinguish. At the same time, it has its one side towards the spirit, similar to how the moon has one side towards the sun. It reflects the sun, and thus we see the moon. We see the light of the moon as a reflection of the light of the sun. And so it has its significance as it helps us reason and think. But Abraham declares here that even it is transient. And only through God's guidance can he be guided. This is very important. In that his own individual faculties, again here the moon representing the soul, the ego, that ego cannot offer him insight of God's knowledge and ultimate realization. It can help him analyze it and understand some of its aspects, but not true and ultimate realization, not metaphysics. And so Abraham moves on. Abraham sees the sun and realizes it as his Lord. The solar symbolism appears in many a tradition as a symbol of spiritual insight and vision, and as a symbol of the center. And here Abraham realizes it is greater, again being the closest to the spirit, the intellectual faculty, that which produces light. And so here we can see from it a symbol of the universal spirit. The sun is equated to the heart, which is the seat of the intellect, the first of all determinations, or what might be termed as the consciousness, or the pen in the Islamic tradition, the universal self. But Abraham realizes that despite its greatness, again it being the closest reality to the ultimate, nevertheless, it still sets. It is also a determination. Even though it produces light, it is still a determination. Even though it is within the level of the universals, beyond limitation in the individual sense, but again, it is still a determination. And so Abraham realizes that God is beyond all determinations, even the determination of the universal spirit. God is infinite, ineffable, indeterminate, non-being. And so, even though the ultimate principle is realized in all of these three levels of being, the star, the moon, and the sun, the corporeal, the psychic, and the spiritual, the senses, the mental faculties, and the intellect, even though we can realize God through the manifestations of these three levels, nevertheless, to achieve ultimate realization, we have to return to the darkness of divine mystery. Not in potentia, as we started in the beginning, but in actio, in reality. Again, here, having realized the divine self. And so Abraham realizes this journey towards the different levels, starting from the external, the most diverse, distinct, towards the most unified, the brightest. But ultimately, we have to go beyond that and realize the inner, true divine self. And here there is no distinction, there is no determination. There is only the essence, there is only God. And so we can only perceive this in God and not as other. From these other levels, we can somehow conceive of a certain distinction or determination. The more we go deeper, the more we leave aside the individual, and we actually leave the individual at the level of the moon. Once we're at the level of the sun, we're at the level of the universal. There is no individuality anymore. There is no ego. There is no self. So we have to lose our ego, but ultimately we also have to go beyond the universal and arrive at the true being and the realization of the divine self. Now, I'd love to end with a couple of verses from the Hindu tradition, and I'll be reading from two different but similar verses. One is from the Katha Upanishad, verse 2.2.15. And it says, "The sun does not shine there, nor do the moon and stars, nor do these lightnings shine. How could this fire? Him shining, all shine after. All this shines by his light." Another verse is the Mundaka Upanishad, verse 2.2.10. And it's again almost verbatim. It says, "The sun shines not there, nor do the moon and the stars, nor do these lightnings shine. How could this fire? All shine after him who shines. All this is illumined by his radiance." And so to understand the depth of these verses, we have to go to the commentary. But basically, in short, what Shankara's commentary, one of the greatest commentators of the Vedas, is that Brahman, the supreme reality, is not determined by anything. And so the sun, the moon, the stars, they don't shine in Brahman. Brahman is utter mystery, ineffable, inexpressible. And so they, the sun, the moon, the stars, are determinations of Brahman. Brahman is the Atman, the self of these determinations. Through the light of Brahman, the sun shines, and again, from the sun, the moon, the stars. And so there's this hierarchy, but nevertheless, all leads back to Brahman, the ultimate light. When we speak of this mystery, this darkness, it is because light is not light to itself. And so it does not need that light. It does not need manifestation. It is beyond need. And so this is what Abraham's prophethood teaches us, this idea of divine contemplation. And so we have to take time and observe creation, observe manifestation, observe ourselves, and slowly but surely start traversing this path from the external towards the internal. And I pray that God grants us realization of his mysteries so that we might bathe in his treasures. Until next time, I bid you farewell, my friends. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.